The Russo brothers are returning to the MCU to direct Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, but first, we got the Electric State. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. Today, I am giving you my review of The Electric State. This is the new Netflix original film that hits the streaming service this Friday. I was able to check it out early, so I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on the movie. I'm going to pros and cons this thing pretty heavily, as you'll see in a second. Before I get into this, though, be sure to hit that like button. Comment down below your thoughts on this movie if you've seen it as of watching this video, or your expectations or predictions if you have not yet watched it. And of course, subscribe and hit that notification bell to help me reach my goal of 150,000 subscribers here on the channel. I mean, quite a bit. But let's waste no time and just go ahead and get right down to business. So this movie reportedly had like a $300 million budget, I want to say. It had been filming for years. I think the pandemic also directly impacted this film's schedule. And so it kind of went through the ringer when it comes to behind-the-scenes production. Now it finally hits Netflix in the year 2025. I thought this was going to come out years ago. That's obviously not the case. Is the movie any good? I'm just going to be real blunt here. No, it's not. In fact, the majority of this video will be focused on my cons. There are still some moments I don't think it's an outright unwatchably bad movie, but if I have to preface with that, then you know something is probably seriously wrong here. But let's just dive in. First off, this movie was messy from the jump. You know how sometimes you'll turn on a movie, whether it's going into the theater and, you know, they play it through the projector or you hit play on your remote at home, and you know within like the first 2 minutes something's off. That was the case with The Electric State. What I mean by that is we got hit with like a date and, you know, before the war. And then we got this really quick scene and it was like, boom, 4 years later, after the war. And then we get all this info dumped on us through like a news broadcast. All of this within the first 5 to 6 minutes. And so they're almost speed running, setting up the world building, and basically just fast forwarding through every important piece of information that can really actually allow the audience to feel invested in a world and at least make, you know, the world that the story takes place in feel real, feel lived in, human in a sense, and that was just all absent here. I think the franchise that excels at doing that the best is maybe like Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, right? The first movie. There's like this huge opening prologue devoted to the backstory of the rings, and it's like this elaborate, you know, intense opening, and then you just get something like The Electric State that's the polar opposite of that, and it's like, ugh, we know what movies are capable of. Why did we have to get, you know, this speed run opening? And then you get into, you know, the actual characters of this story, and I can't lie here, I was really underwhelmed by every single performance, because I couldn't even remember half the characters' names, and I just finished the movie maybe 20 minutes ago. The only character's name I remember, Chris, because my name is Chris, and so I heard that name a ton throughout the movie, but even Millie Bobby Brown's character, her name's escaping me. I think it might be Michelle, but then I'm trying to think, who are the other characters? No, and that's a problem, because there's no memorable writing here. In fact, the script for this movie, I don't want to like say the cliche thing, but this movie's so cliche that I feel like it warrants me saying like the cliche critique. It feels like something that's AI generated. I know that's cringe. I know it's become an overused phrase, but I mean it sincerely. It's nothing original. It's about as generic as it gets when it comes to a straight-to-streaming movie. So you will really gain nothing from watching this for the most part. You'll know everything that's coming, and every major emotional beat, predictable as hell. So like, this movie's not going to surprise you with anything. You know exactly what you're getting into after about the first 7 to 8 minutes. You're like, okay, I've seen this movie before, and I didn't like the ending. There's a little Taylor Swift reference for you. Millie Bobby Brown plays Eleven in Stranger Things. I think she's great in that role. Chris Pratt, I mean, Star-Lord, he's in the Jurassic films. He's done tons of stuff. They're the two leads of this film, and they're two of the most popular actors in Hollywood right now, arguably, right? Well, they really don't have any chemistry here. Like, none. And then you look at the rest of the cast, you would be shocked to find who's in this movie. Giancarlo Esposito, Stanley Tucci, and then we're getting into voice talent now. You've got Brian Cox of Succession fame, Logan Roy himself, Woody Harrelson, Anthony Mackie, Quan plays a role in this film. There are Academy Award nominees and winners all over this thing, and I cannot believe what the final product was. I honestly was just astounded watching, because the movie's about 2 hours and 8 minutes, and I had to rewind many times because I was getting what I call sleepy eyes. You know how your eyes will start to burn when you get tired and you have to rub them a bunch? And even then, that's not enough. I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. I paused the movie, set a 10-minute timer, and took a power nap about halfway through. I couldn't have done that if it was a theater. I would have just been fighting for my life. But at home, I had the privilege of napping in the middle of this movie to push through, because it was just so uninteresting. There was nothing of value really happening. It tries desperately to hook the audience with this emotional core, or like the relationship between a sister and brother. I couldn't really buy into that because it felt forced onto the audience. Like, there's this character who's supposed to be this like Einstein level genius, almost like pitching him as like the savior of humanity in this weird way. Like, that's how highly they hold this character. And the only reason we have to believe that this guy's smart is that he's taking a test to go to college and he finishes the test quickly. They rush through what could have been the most interesting part of this movie, which, like I said, was up front, the war. I would have much rather just seen a movie about a war, about robots trying to overthrow humanity. That's also something we've seen a bunch, but it could have been 10 times more interesting and maybe catered to the Russo brothers' strengths as directors. You know, we've seen them direct Infinity War, Civil War. You expect action. That's kind of a staple of the Russos, and this movie severely lacked that. Even the Netflix movie they did, The Gray Man, had some, you know, action sequences that stood out. They've produced, I believe, the Extraction movies. Those have, like, those one-shot action scenes that are, like, dope. You're like, wow, this is actually pretty thrilling. None of that applies to the Electric State. Shockingly bland, I will say. Maybe of the post-Endgame Russo Bros movies, with that being Cherry with Tom Holland, this, and of course the Gray Man, I think that's what it's called, this is probably the blandest of the bunch. There's not like a singular performance that really stands out as memorable. None of the characters are remarkable in any sense, and the movie is just dull. Really falls flat. It is pretty much the equivalent of every other like movie that's come straight to streaming in the past few years that is so unmemorable that it just added onto the scrap pile of like money being lit on fire. That's kind of how I feel about this. And I don't want to be too mean to it because I love a lot of the actors involved here. The Russos have made my favorite MCU movie, but if I'm being genuine here and honest, this was a huge misfire. I don't know how this movie was made, really. It missed the mark almost entirely for me. Another thing that irked me was like the soundtrack for this movie was basically greatest hits on shuffle. Like, if you grew up and listened to like classic rock with your dad in the car, it was basically like taking every major hit that radio station plays multiple times a day, every day of the week, and throwing it in here, whether you're getting an orchestral version or just a straight up song. And it was like in succession. So it wasn't just, oh, here's a song, and then 15 minutes later you'll get another song. Like, there were moments where we'd be hearing like a Journey song, and then it would go to like another classic rock song instantly. You know what it reminded me of? Suicide Squad from 2016, a movie that many claim to be just a glorified music video, and I kind of share that viewpoint. You could certainly argue that The Electric State falls under like the music video film category, where anytime something starts to happen that's not two characters speaking to each other, some popular rock song starts to play for no real reason. Like, I am all for like James Gunn handpicking like this niche music, deep cuts that like I am really in the dark on. I'm like, this works. He also picks bangers like No Sleep Till Brooklyn, like a really popular song by the Beastie Boys, but it works. Here, it's like, let's just, you know, go to Spotify and have ChatGPT sort of pick our soundtrack for the movie. That's what it felt like, and it just really lessens the quality to me. I don't know if that's nitpicky, but I feel that way strongly. And then when it comes to the dialogue, right? The story, very paper thin, but the dialogue, cliche as hell. There are so many one-liners here that you've heard in just about every generic movie, and it really, again, takes the audience on a route. I was like, ugh. There were so many like dad jokes that missed the mark. There's a character, Mr. Peanut, who's like one of the robots in the film, and there's a character, Millie Brown, Michelle, who's like, oh, that's nuts. Sorry. Oh, I get that all the time. Don't worry. Like, that's cringe. I think that clip might have made the rounds on social media, but there's constantly moments like that. For example, there's a scene where robots are fighting, and one character will be like, tally ho! They're just like shouting out these like outdated phrases that like kids would say. Like, I remember playing on the playground with my friends and saying like the dumbest things. Like, it reminds me of that SpongeBob episode with like the shark driving instructor.
Tell my wife I love her. Come get some.
There's unironically multiple lines like that, but they don't have the comedic genius of SpongeBob. It's just like, what are we doing here? Oh man, I can't get over how just painfully dumb this movie was. I think the funniest sort of ongoing plot point in this film is the fact that there's this new technology where humans can kind of put on, think like an Apple Vision Pro or like one of those VR headsets essentially, and it splits the brain so that like you have, you know, your home life, or like your leisure life, and then like your work life. And there's a popular show I'm watching right now called Severance. You might have heard of it, right? And I'm like, this is just ripping off Severance, but it's a watered down version of that at best. Almost insulting, because there's like no intrigue, depth, or like nuance to the conversation. It's just, oh, this is bad. There's not much else to it. And I was like, damn, they could have done so much with that. And it was just kind of brushed past, unfortunately. Now again, this is not an unwatchably bad movie. I'll highlight a couple things. I do think surface level entertainment can be had here if you want like background noise. There's some cool fight sequences, sure. Nothing too memorable, but like Giancarlo's character is this bounty hunter of sorts who like hunts down these different robots. That's a cool concept, and you know, Giancarlo, he's gonna deliver his lines in his signature sort of menacing tone of voice, so you've seen that before. It's nothing new. I mean, hell, we just saw him play a similar character in Brave New World last month, but still, the concept is there, so I'll give him that. There's like a battle sequence that reminded me of like the Gungans versus the droids in the Phantom Menace, just the way it all played out and the way it was visually shot. So if you like the Phantom Menace, there you go. I do. I have a soft spot for it. I'll admit it. I'll own that. I'm not gonna, you know, turn my back on that movie, but I know that me comparing this to The Phantom Menace probably doesn't excite a lot of you watching this video, so I get it. And some of the voice acting works for me. Like Brian Cox, I just imagine him like having fun, screaming out these different absurd like one-liners. You know, like I feel like he probably got a kick out of it. He also got a nice paycheck as well, but you know what I'm getting at. But really and truly, at the end of the day, The Electric State is super forgettable. Like, if you watch this movie, you won't remember it in a couple weeks. It'll be one of those movies that, like, when you're making your end-of-the-year list or we're approaching 2026, you'll be like, wait, that came out this year? Wait, I actually watched that? It's gonna go in one ear, out the other, and that's kind of the state of a lot of straight-to-Netflix or straight-to-streaming movies. There are like few ones that really stand out and are memorable, and oftentimes it's when it's like a big name director who decides to make a movie straight for streaming, like say, you know, someone like Martin Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon, or a David Fincher, you know, people like that who, or hell, like Rian Johnson with Knives Out 2. I don't understand the business of it all. I don't know how this works. I don't know how this isn't detrimental to the streamer. But at the end of the day, The Electric State, highly forgettable. It's like a 2 out of 5 at best. I imagine this one's gonna get panned by a lot of people, and it's a shame because I love so much of the talent involved. My big concern here is, can the Russos do something outside of the MCU? Because Cherry was okay, you know, The Gray Man was fine. This is probably the worst thing they've done outside of the MCU. But when they come back to Doomsday and Secret Wars, will they have, as the kids say, the sauce? Or is Kevin Feige pulling the strings all along? It's a question we'll never know the answer to, I guess. But we'll have to see in a couple years whenever those movies end up coming out. But that does it for my honest review of The Electric State. I kept wanting to call it Damsel throughout that entire review because Millie Bobby Brown did a movie called Damsel on Netflix last year. Kind of forgettable as well. Anyway, what do you think? If you've seen this, if you haven't, let me know your predictions, your expectations. Are you going to watch this movie or not? Of course, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and be on the lookout for more videos coming very soon. But thank you guys, as always, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.